Hello, it's Brad Laurie or BlockchainBrad, and today I'm talking about all things scale, and that specifically is a blockchain startup. It's not just simply a term that refers to everything that all blockchains are trying to do. We have the CEO and the CTO in the hot seat right now to explain everything they're doing. Firstly, we have Jack O'Halloran. He is the CEO. Jack, thank you very much, mate, for leading the way with scale.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for inviting us. We're happy to be here, Brad, and excited to be on the show.
Likewise, mate. It's been a long time coming. We've been chatting for, I think, almost a year now, but you've really been building a lot. And with you, you have the CTO, as I mentioned. We have Dr. Stan Kladko. Thank you very much also for being the technical representation, the person who can lead the way in all that tech speak we need to know.
Hey, Brad, thank you for inviting us here.
You're very welcome, mate. Now, let's start. You're the CEO, Jack. There's a lot that's been happening. Everyone's talking about all kinds of solutions for different layer one platforms. Scale specifically, words like elastic sidechains come up almost immediately when you look at your resources, your website, your white paper. But mate, as the leader of this, can you give us a rundown very specifically on what you're doing and essentially what are the key features?
Yeah, great question, Brad. So elastic is a great call out. I think typically blockchains have been inelastic and not flexible, not modular, not configurable. If you look at the way enterprise software and enterprise infrastructure has evolved over time, you'll see that it is very elastic, it's very configurable, it's very modular, and it's built that way so that developers can deploy the resources they need. Mm-hmm. So as we were looking at, as Stan and I, as the founders, put our heads together a long time ago, we actually were looking at building a decentralized application and looking at building decentralized exchanges or mobile payment platforms and different critical decentralized applications that we think are going to be huge in the next year. As we were doing that, we were just noticing there was a huge gap in what we needed to build out these applications. And Stan, who has a PhD in physics from Max Planck Institute and was at Los Alamos National Laboratory and Stanford, and he was on the Java virtual machine compiler team, founded a cryptography company, or was on the founding team of a cryptography company all the way back in 2000 with Dan Bonnet, started out of Stanford. Stan had this amazing vision for what we needed for our decentralized application. Right. And we decided, let's actually bring this to other people. And so what Scale is an elastic blockchain network where each node in the Scale network can actually run 128 different blockchains, or it could be compiled to just be on one blockchain if you want to pull all those resources in. So really what we have is this, let's say there's 1,000 nodes in the Scale network, we could be running 8,000 independent blockchains. Now, in terms of the utility, and in terms of one of the main use cases, we provide sidechain functionality. Mm-hmm. And we call it elastic sidechain functionality because traditional sidechains need to be appended to a blockchain, and usually you just have a set of nodes that are running another blockchain.
Exactly.
But if those nodes go down, you could lose your data, the money could be stuck. An elastic network is a network comprised of many nodes that can be pulled together to have subgroups run different blockchains.
Yes, and we're going to get into those subgroups. Just want to jump in there for you, Jack.
Okay, yeah.
There's so many. You've got virtualized subgroups. You've got all kinds of things happening with your nodes. We're going to go into detail with Stan later. Just on what Jack's saying, I wanted to ask you, one of the big things that is very clear in Scale is that you're not even finite by number with the nodes themselves. Your plan is to be infinite, really, in the potential of these nodes, especially in that sidechain design.
Totally. And, I think really a unique thing about Scale, really number one thing about Scale, is that we try to follow lean startup, customer-driven development, ideas. So we're really trying to understand what our customers want, and we're humble enough to change if we see that something doesn't work and a different feature needs to be introduced. So I think that separates us a lot from other companies because we really are, for us, the customers are number one. And the customers are dApp developers and also validators. So we want our validators to make money. We want our network to grow.
Yes.
Potentially and then we want the dApp developers to have a great service, and the end goal of this is to become something like AWS. By the end of the year, we're going to have all of the technology to match AWS. So anything you could do on a regular web, on a regular website on AWS, you'll be able to do on Scale. And then this network will grow, and we hope at some point we'll have thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions even of nodes. You know, Google has millions of nodes, AWS has millions of servers. So we want to match this computational power, and then we're just looking for what people want, and that makes us unique. During like 3 or 4 last hackathons at ETH Global, our solution was #1 in terms of adoption, in terms of how hackers used it. And the reason for that, because we realized, is that people want decentralization. People want their own blockchain. They don't want to share. And also, people want, as Jack said, elasticity and flexibility that they do get on AWS. On AWS, if you don't have money, you have a free virtual machine. If you just have like $10 a month, you get a tiny, tiny virtual machine, but then you can get a large virtual machine.
Right.
Huge.
Well, let's talk. Well, can we just bring it back though for a moment? Now, one of the things that I did want to talk to you about, Elastic is a buzzword for you, but you're also built largely in concert with Ethereum, with the EVM as well. So Jack, can we talk about that for just a moment? And what's the relationship with Ethereum? Why are they the bedrock for the layer 2 solution that you're providing to scale?
So per Stan's message earlier, we're very customer focused, and so for us it's developers. So developers are the king. We support developers, and developers now are on Ethereum. So if you look at people that want to run smart contracts, they're building them on Ethereum. We do have other systems growing and evolving, and if developers go to those other systems, we'll be there. So Stan can get into this later, but we'll have support for Libra, we'll have support for EOS, we'll have support for actually Bitcoin, where developers will be able to leverage Solidity smart contracts and leverage Bitcoin in the Scale network. So we also, being part of the Ethereum ecosystem, I think is incredibly helpful. There's so many smart people that are passionate about really building and not so much about money. It's building first, it's code first, and that just matches our ethos too. So we've really enjoyed being in that community. And then the Scale network also leverages the Ethereum network for security, in that when validators stake their stake into the Scale network, it actually gets staked into Ethereum. And so then we have a series of smart contracts on Ethereum that work in concert with all of our nodes. And they work together to do the resourcing and the auditing and the management and the orchestration that needs to happen within our decentralized network that works in concert with Ethereum.
I see. So Stan, that's how the proof of stake becomes imperative for the staking model that you've designed. And that's why you have this symbiotic relationship with Ethereum. Because as Jack was saying in the first part of his response, is that you are agnostic by design when it comes to the potential for you to integrate with other blockchains. But when it comes to staking in that proof of stake, can we hark back to the value that you bring synergistically, or the synergistic relationship you have with Ethereum? That's quite important.
Totally. And we really thought hard about how we grow our company. And in a sense, we are very perpendicular to other guys, because other guys, everyone is trying to create their own layer 1 platform. And what our bet is that, there is like Pepsi and Coke, there is iPhone and Android. Usually the number of brands is really limited in a particular space. So we have Bitcoin, we have Ether, we have 2 very strong brands, and the momentum of the Ethereum ETH developer community is unstoppable. I think our evaluation was it's impossible to compete with ETH ecosystem. I'm not talking about a particular, ETH mainnet. I'm talking about ETH compatibility. You have Firefox, you have Chrome, you have Explorer, all of them run JavaScript. In the same way, our bet is that the future is going to be ETH compatibility growing, and all other platforms, frankly, not mattering much. So we stay within the ETH ecosystem, and this gives us huge advantage. Every ETH tool, every developer tool, every deployment tool, everything that has MetaMask, everything which has been developed for ETH works out of the box without any change on scale, but just works much faster. So we actually, as a tiny startup, we would never be able to get so many customers as we have now and so much of adoption and brand if we didn't really steal ETH ecosystem and ETH brand. And
Absolutely.
we want to contribute back to ETH. So we want to be good citizens. And our total, last year we made this bet. This year we just see that our bet was totally right. So our vision of the future is that ETH ecosystem and brand just growing and taking everything. While there will be so many different networks and tools, it doesn't have to be just ETH mainnet.
Sure.
But,
and no doubt, Stan, sorry to interrupt, but no doubt, as you also optimize through the use of the SDKs and all of the suite of tools that Ethereum provide, including their own developing language, you obviously are going to develop your own tool suite, your own SDK, your own optimizer. So how is that going right now with your own code development, your own resource development?
So there's two things that we're doing. One thing which is interchange compatibility. We won't be able to bring tokens from ETH, but also from other ecosystems to our sidechains. Want to be able, we already connected to ETH, but we also want to be able to connect to Bitcoin and connect to Libra, maybe EOS, you name it. So we want to be able to security bring all of other tokens to our platform, where these tokens will be able to be processed by Ethereum, by ETH, Solidity, VM, and stuff. So suddenly you'll be able to process Bitcoin using Ethereum, smart contracts, you'll be able to process EOS and stuff like that. This part is hugely successful, and our guys are literally working day and night, transferring all kinds of tokens to our sidechains because customers are demanding this. Literally,
right. So you're truly interoperable in that sense.
Yeah, that's a big thing, and we are now able to transfer all kinds of ERC20 tokens. We are able to transfer all kinds of ERC 700 substance tokens like CryptoKitties and stuff. So we'll be able to pull all of this into one single place. So that's one thing which has been doing unexpectedly tremendously great, I think. And another thing which really was really important to us is to have security in our system. And we started with consensus, how the thing actually worked, the proof of stake thing. And what we only started, we didn't really understand how it worked. And what we realized, people were trying to do different things, and everyone was saying, wow, I'm great, you're great. But there was no logic argument how one guy can prove that he or she is better than another guy.
Right.
So we started with kind of creating like a zoo. So putting all different animals in a zoo, or if you take analogy with a car, you open a trunk, and you have the carburetor, and you have the engine, and the battery. And once you're able to split the insides of consensus into logical pieces, you'll say, okay, this guy has this carburetor, or this guy has this battery. So we have this unique way to classify consensuses, in which way we can take Tendermint, we can take Definity, and suddenly bring everything to the same framework in the same way as people do for cars, right?
Okay, so let's explore that analogy, because you just mentioned some really big protocols. Tendermint is a great example. Cosmos is an extremely well-known blockchain right now, and arguably, developing into a very well-known business model for the future of decentralized sort of economies. But if you're going to optimize and utilize some of these protocols and still have your own, how is that going to work? How can you bring the best out of these as part of your own engine? Or your own car in that analogy?
We actually have our own thing. So when we split the consensus into pieces and we looked at this car, we realized that what we now can do, now we understand how Tendermint works, we understand how Definity works, we understand how ETH 2.0 works. Now we can go back to academic science and take the best battery, the best carburetor, and the best wheels from the academic research. So we went back to research done by MIT, at Stanford, and we can now prove that our stuff is the best because we have this framework. So
Got
if
it.
someone
So you've
comes and
taken
says,
the best of what you've seen in the space. So your fortune, part of it is having seen some of these blockchains emerge and look at some of the, perhaps some of the boons, the benefits, the quality that they've offered, but then try to bring them together into something now you've created a scale. Now, Jack, I want to talk to you, mate, because in the narratives we've seen emerge, we've seen a lot of talk about layer 2 solutions. Some of them recently emerged, some of them are on Binance now, and some of them have just created such immense buzz. So in this landscape of layer 2s, especially when in the context of this, the relationship with Ethereum, what sets you apart, mate? Like, why is it that Scale has the potential to potentially supersede some of these solutions that are out there now?
So I think that's a really good question, and it's there's a couple pieces to this. One is what I want to say. I'll talk to the advantages of the Scale network, and then I'll talk about how the other building blocks actually can be added into Scale or to Ethereum, whatever it might be. So first off, if you think of Scale again as a whole network of blockchains,
right?
And it's the setup is that if I'm a developer, I actually get my own blockchain, and I can change it. I can paint it yellow or put big tires on it to Stan's, car analogy. Like, I've got my blockchain and I can connect it to Ethereum. Now, the thing when you do this, and because of Scales, like the threshold signatures we have with BLS threshold signatures, being able to allow us to message back and forth with our consensus being very fast with fast block times, and because of our message transfer and the way we can bring tokens back and forth, what you have is a very seamless user experience. So we put security onus on the validators. And we think that if this whole community and blockchains are going to grow, we're going to need to be able to have to trust more networks, because in the current state, if you just want to use state channels, you just want to use Plasma, these are good growing areas of research, but one of the key issues is user experience. On Scale, the end user doesn't need to know they're using Scale. They just literally use an application. They have no issues. Exactly. It makes it very cost effective. And we think that anything that hurts user experience is a net drag on the industry. And we need this industry to grow, right? It can't just be this small group. We need the whole world of people that are using mobile applications today to be using blockchain. So,
exactly. You need to take it beyond crypto into the mainstream.
Yes.
And Jack, one of the things I wanted to ask you, you make a really good point there. Often when we talk about the trilemma, there's often some of those, one aspect of the trilemma suffers. Now, one thing I have read is you're trying to really solve that by addressing the security through the staking model. How do you then ensure the throughput is, really maintained and really uplifted through the system, so you do have that speed, you have that really significant and all imperative necessary TPS? I'm not talking millions. I don't like to do that, but I do want to know, how do you address the needs of the scale, literally, and also how do you meet the needs of the people as obviously this builds out through the ecosystem you build?
So what I would say is, if you look at every Scale chain, so let's say you have a full 16 nodes that are pulled from, let's say there's thousands of nodes and you get allocated your group, that can do 2,000 smart contracts per second. Right. The other piece that's even more critical when we talk to our customers, our partners who use Scale in our DevNet today, what they like even more than just that throughput is fast block times. So they can do sub-second block times. So we have game developers that aren't just jamming everything into one smart contract that needs to run for a long period of time. They can now have multiple smart contracts and multiple moves that all interact with each other at sub-second times. And so you can build far more robust on-chain applications, which is really cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And I wanted to ask you guys as well, Jack, I guess this is going back to you again, because you are the CEO, you know all about the business. The pipeline, mate, is one thing I really wanted to know, because one of the things you said before is that in the perfect scenario, the user doesn't know that Scale exists. And that's ironic because we're talking, right now about all the things you're building, but that's the truth. So in that respect, how is the dApp or the decentralized applications, how is that building? How is that emerging? Because yes, you haven't moved out into the sort of the visible landscape yet. People don't all know about you, but I would imagine people are paying attention and developers are already trying to experiment with your code.
Yeah, so we have we ran this thing called the Scale Innovator Program, where we selected in very high quality projects and companies, and we had 5 in the first cohort, 5 in the second. There's 10 that are joining right now, and we have over 50 companies that are in the pipeline that are waiting to use Scale, and so that's been very reassuring. So for us, it's just like we look at this like Heroku or Docker or Kubernetes. Like no end user ever knows like every day I interact with Kubernetes and Docker and Heroku, and we don't know.
Right.
We think the same should exist with infrastructure and crypto. So we want to support on the back end, and we need to be the best friend of the developer and let them be a hero. Let them bring cost-effective, secure, high performant applications or decentralized applications to their customers, and then we've done our job. So that's
Sure.
our goal.
And with that regard as well, Jack, is that obviously there are verticals across the board. I mean, it's limitless by potential, but are you finding that right now in this nascent space that there are certain verticals that are more appropriate or more conditioned for Scale? For example, we hear the narratives of gaming as one because of the NFTs and because of the interest from developers right now and the potential of decentralized economies to emerge, especially with digital assets. But are you finding that really you're limitless, or are you focused on certain things right now?
Yeah, so the way we think about our segmentation and the sweet spot for Scale is less about, it's actually less about vertical. It ends up being that 50% of our customers are gaming, because I think that's going to be the big industry that pops in the next year. So that's just the nature of where the traction is. But for us, it's less around vertical and it's more around the way smart contracts are leveraged. So, right. So it's people that it's dApps that need high throughput of smart contracts. They need fast block times. They need even flexible block sizes. And they also need storage. So we have storage too. You don't need to use IPFS or Filecoin or other storage in many use cases, other storage solutions either. You can use SKALE'S. Right. So that is, so really it's high throughput. People need low cost. And right now it's people that need to connect to Ethereum. Got it. People are also, they're actually minting tokens on Scale as well. Mm-hmm. And then as they accrue value, they can use these tokens and mint them at a very low price, and they can use it as a go-to-market resource. And then once things start capturing value, let's say it's an NFT, they could burn it on Scale and move it to Ethereum and then keep it there in a secure place. So we're seeing very interesting things come just as people start using the infrastructure.
So people can essentially create their own value through the token model you've built so that they can, as you said, mint. So can you talk about that a bit more? That's quite interesting, especially for those who want to interact in your token, interact in your ecosystem, and because it's tokenized and it's monetized, that's going to be something that can really uplift their own situation because they are essentially autonomous actors in the space.
Yes. Exactly, and that's why I try to say it's an independent network of blockchains as opposed to just the layer 2 sidechain solution. Because what it is, and hey, our developers, our customers drive our thinking and our roadmap. And what they said is we want to build a mint on Scale. Because the challenge is if you mint on the mainnet, it's expensive. You have to pay to store it. You have to pay to mint it. And let's say you want to go to market and you want to, go try to hit 1 million people and that only 1% might convert. That's a huge waste of money on the mainnet. You could do that on a sidechain and mint these things and they don't have any, real value until they start getting leveraged. And then in aggregate, they grow in value. And then individually, when they get really valuable, they can be moved over and stored. And then it's worth the ROI of keeping them on the Ethereum mainnet.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that you could do that. And Stan, I wanted to talk to you a bit more about 4 aspects because it's going to take us a bit of time, but these are really fundamental to the entire technological architecture that you've built in. The first is leaderless consensus, and the second is the threshold signatures. Jack already touched on that, so I want to focus on the leaderless aspect. Why is it important to have this design as part of your core tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. So consensus is actually a very simple thing. Essentially, someone has to propose a block, and other guys are agreeing on this block. But if the consensus has a leader, which means like EOS, for instance, or tendermint. The guy who is the leader can influence things. For instance, this guy can postpone the block or withhold the block or rearrange the transactions in the block. So the problem, if you have a leader for a particular block, this leader can influence things. And that becomes incredibly important for things like, for instance, decentralized exchanges, because when people trade, the order of your trades matters super importantly.
Right.
So because of that, you want to have a leaderless protocol where everyone can propose. And when you propose, at the moment you propose, you don't know whether your block is going to be accepted. And that's why you cannot influence things. So our consensus is much better for trading. And also we have this super cool thing, which is called threshold encryption, because you don't know that your block is going to be accepted. Actually, we can encrypt things in such a way that until the block is accepted, you don't even know what transaction is that. So the transaction is decrypted after it's inside the block.
I see. So there's degrees of privacy you've built in.
And it provides automatic solution for a thing which is called front running. You may have read on news or some talks like people do front running, like on Etherdelta, make like millions because you insert the transaction in front of other. It's a technology, this threshold encryption plus leaderless protocols automatically and seamlessly removes the problems of front running and this influence. So you can build your decentralized exchange or any other type of financial application, and you're sure all of the security possibilities and bad things are automatically protected for. It's mathematically impossible to tweak this thing. So that's why the leaderless protocol is so important.
Right. Now, what about with regard to asynchronous protocol? Now, for those who don't know, it's so important, I think, when we talk about the concept of synchronicity, why is this asynchronous structure better in your view?
There are two. So asynchronous actually means very simple things. In asynchronous protocols, there are some things which are called delays or timeouts or some block times. For instance, in ETH, you have like 17 seconds block time. So if you submit a transaction, even if it's a single transaction, you have to wait for 17 seconds until it's actually included. In our protocol, if the chain is totally unused and you submit a single transaction, it automatically goes immediately into a block, and it will be a one transaction block. The block will compose immediately of one transaction, and you won't have to wait for any other guys. So it's going to be responding immediately, and that's important for things like games. You play chess, you make a move, immediately your transaction is in the block.
Right.
So that's one reason why asynchronicity is important. Another super cool reason is that because there are no delays or wait times in the system, let's say you have a synchronous network, and suddenly, the network link between America and Europe is totally like damaged for a day. There's no connection between Europe and America. Then what's going to happen that for synchronous networks, like for instance, Algorand, right? God knows what's going to happen because synchronous networks assume that there is a finite propagation time.
Right.
A synchronous network like ours, you can literally cut all of the cables between the US and America and wait for a week, and then you reconnect the cables, and the network will just come out of the sleep immediately and operate as nothing happened.
I see.
So this is highly survivable network. As Vitalik Buterin likes to say, what happens if there's third world war? Okay, asynchronous networks can wait 1,000 years, and then you reconnect the cables and it works again.
Right, so it wouldn't matter what era they're in, whether they're in, the Paleolithic or contemporary time. The point is they still retain their value, and they can be automatic once fired up. And I appreciate that explanation. Now let's go across. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then if you can synchronous networks which are easier to build. Like for instance, Algorand is an example of asynchronous networks.
Sure.
And for synchronous network, you don't know what happens if everything stops for a day. And so they're trying to add some solutions to resolve this problem. But one thing to remember is Bitcoin is fully asynchronous. ETH is asynchronous. All POW networks are synchronous. You could actually cut the cable between the US and the Europe, and then reconnect it after a day, and Bitcoin will rearrange blocks and survive.
That's a really good point, because if you're modeling that on those, sorry to interrupt, but that makes a lot of sense, because it means, once again, harping back to the potential to expand your own network, interoperate with those networks, and enable the best of these networks to work with scale. I think that's a really important point. Jack, do you want to touch on that, mate, at all?
Yeah, I don't know if I can add too much further. I think Stan did a pretty good job of just capturing the value of having asynchronous networks in terms of their survivability. And I think as we've switched to POS, some of the values of POW were lost, and I think it's cool to see this research evolve. And by the way, I also, one thing to add to Stan's statement about how we examined all the parts of the car. What Stan and our team was able to do was examine the math. So we still had to do all the coding on our own, but we were able to combine provability, or proven math and some code, but then really put a year plus of work into building this consensus. So.
Right. And I wanted to ask you, Jack, in that context, because, we talked about this briefly before. We see these emergent layer 2 solutions, diverse in design, some based on sharding, trying to, literally scale that way, some with using some sort of lattice or whatever it is that they're trying to do something innovative. But is there space even with Ethereum, for example, for a multitude of layer 2 solutions? Is it robust enough to cope with this, or do you feel that there's going to be certain players that really emerge to support the ecosystem like Ethereum?
Great. So earlier I didn't get a chance to get to this, but I was saying these are actually building blocks. So if you look at Scale being an independent blockchain that can connect to Ethereum, you can actually, so a lot of the state channel companies are coming to us and saying, or projects are coming saying, hey, can we build integration with Scale? Then you could run a state channel on a Scale chain. We could run a Plasma on a Scale chain. So these are building blocks, and I think we need all of them, because there are going to be different types of use cases where these particular building blocks, where Plasma might be very, very useful and the best solution. And over here, you might want a state channel, or you may want it running on a side chain and you want a Plasma. Or so we're Scale's partnering with Aztec. We're doing a big event in London next week. Awesome. You could have Aztec running on a Scale chain too, and then have privacy and scalability all running in a side chain and have low gas costs. So there's some really cool things. And I think as we evolve and as the market grows, we'll start thinking of these things as assets we can all resource. And that's really part of our strategy, again, at Scale, is we have base infrastructure that on its own is very valuable and can be coupled with other solutions to have low cost, high impact results.
It's almost like you're a unique layer 2 because of the way that Stan and the team and you have all put this together. Now, what about the partnerships, especially the blockchain ones? You mentioned again that you're agnostic. Are you already talking with any of the layer 2s, for example, like the likes of Seller or Matic? They're big names at the moment, but there's so many. Have you ever considered having conversations with any of these blockchains entities to try and collaborate formally?
Yeah, we definitely are in a lot of talks with them. One thing that's critical for us is to show that the base application, if you use Scale on its own, it is highly valuable and impactful. So we want to definitely show first that this on its own is sufficient for the majority of use cases. And we also just need to focus our efforts. It's a matter of where do our developer resources go. But then as that first version comes out, we're really excited with partnering with other solutions, especially if you look at the Plasma providers, you look at the state channel providers. But for most use cases, frankly, it won't truly be needed. Scale on its own is sufficient.
Got it.
But then there's things where you look at other industry components, like things like Chainlink, where you're providing Oracle support, or you look at Arweave, where our storage and their storage can work hand in hand, and there's a lot of synergy. Or you look at an Aztec, where they could integrate their technology for privacy and scalability in a Scale chain. But then there's also, so I think the developers, the customers will drive requirements, and we'll be there to support what they need. A lot of partnerships, I think, are about informing, driving like excitement in the retail, like in the investor community. So
Right.
we're not, we're just kind of building right now. We're not too worried about that, but eventually, yeah, we're doing that.
Well, it's exciting that you're in that phase now of all the testing. And in that respect, I guess, Stan and Jack as well, you could both answer the question of the roadmap with regard to the stress test, with regard to the test net, all the testing that's going on with Scale. Where are you at, guys, with that as you move towards mainnet? Because obviously you're very much geared in being the real deal native token. You want to actually emerge as something that is of true utility, but that requires significant iterations to make sure that it's going to operate properly. Where are you at and how's everything going? How transparent is it as well with regard to GitHub access?
Yes, that's a great question. So I can tell you, to bring an example, Oracle is a database which is like, I think, 30 years old or 50 years old. And people buy Oracle and pay millions of dollars per copy, although there is MySQL, which is also a database, right? But banks buy Oracle because it is so stable, right? It's so secure and it's so reliable. So our space is finance. So in our space, reliability and security is number one. Frankly, we already have enough features. What we need to get is stability and security. And there are several things that we have. One thing, we are mathematically provable. We are probably the first ever proof of stake blockchain which is mathematically provable from the beginning to the end. Mm-hmm. So we're going to publish all of this as a mathematical paper, and actually also going to go a little further. We're thinking about publishing a college course or textbook on proof of stake systems for math departments, because we know that all of our steps are mathematically proven from the beginning to the end. We're going to publish the textbook because...
Stan, I want to just ask you, is that peer reviewed as well? That a lot of these research?
We're going, it's not, it is peer reviewed because this car, right, this carburetor and the battery and the wheels that we use, we didn't invent any of this ourselves. We are using results of academic work. And in this way, we're unique because we're not claiming we invented this. We're a startup which is based on the shoulders of giants, of mathematicians working in academia. So every single thing that we use, we have a peer-reviewed paper we will point to, and we're pointing to already. So that this makes things unique and provable from beginning to the end if one takes the compilation of all of these peer-reviewed papers.
Right.
So that's number one, and that's why. And another thing, we need to make this known to people. That's why I'm thinking about this college textbook. We're thinking about having a video course, doing something to explain every single thing to people. So that's number one. And number two is security, which means that we need to get rid of security bugs. And for this one, we really believe in the value of decentralization. So instead of growing our core team to hire like zillions of security experts, we are gonna do the best ourselves to fix all the security bugs. But then we'll put everything on Gitcoin and let the community find the things. So we're going to be totally open about stabilizing and finding problems in our product. And actually, we want to transition from a company to a project and to foundation and really dissolve in open source. Really want this ultimately to be open source.
And that's a good sign, because that's supposed to be the premise, I think, of these non-for-profits, and I'm not suggesting that, we'll find out from you in your design, but essentially the roadmap should be so that things become more self-regulated, so that you don't have to necessarily have people in a sort of centralized concept, deciding from an inner team. But right now, you're not that. Right now, you need to build this out. So, Jack, I want to go to you for a moment. You're the CEO at the boardroom leading this. You have a stellar team. I have a look at all of them. There's a lot of engineers. There's a lot of tech-savvy people. But, mate, how are you going to scale as a business, model, or are indeed you something else? How do you build this? And are you even thinking about revenue on top of Scale? What's the actual plan for the people that are, that make up Scale right now?
So we have about 25 people, and that's some really amazing business side, marketing, solutions engineering in San Francisco, and then the engineering team is all with Stan in Ukraine. So the team, we're perfectly dialed in to help grow this network. Now, what we're doing is Stan and I just set up our foundation. So the foundation exists. It's the Node Foundation. It's based in Liechtenstein, which borders Switzerland. So very similar laws, but even more, I think,
liberal and very pro-blockchain.
Exactly, very pro-blockchain, and so there's a lot of things we really liked about it. And so what we're doing, SKALE'S is going to be passing IP and money and really everything we have for the most part to the foundation. Then SKALE'S will continue to act and support the foundation as a vendor. And then what this is Stan and I are going to part ways with power and control, because then the community can start controlling it. But it's a graduated process, so we can still make sure this gets off the ground. And hey, we're not going to go anywhere. We're still going to be supporting it, but we can't just say we're going to do this and this. And so we've actually blacklisted powers that the foundation has in our statutes and bylaws, which I think is very unique. I don't know if anyone else has done this.
I haven't heard anything like this before.
Yeah, so we can't change things. We cannot change economic components. It's against the rules of the entity. And so what that means is that we rely on a set of representatives that represent the network to facilitate on-chain governance. And that's how we're going to run this thing. And we really, and Stan talked about some big numbers at the beginning and us really becoming this decentralized AWS. And the only way we can do that is by giving this to the validators and the people and the developers, so they can eventually govern it themselves, just like we see with other truly decentralized systems.
Right. Now, how do you develop resources and financial backing or support for yourselves as you do this? Because right now we hear some different blockchains right now wanting to move into that decentralized endpoint, to be able to have the ability to step back and say, yes, high five each other and say we did it. Now it's all self-regulatory and people literally building out infinite number of nodes, and it's working. But to do it, you still need some resources, and one of them is money. Have you got any means at all in your roadmap to think about how you can sustain your own team?
Yeah, so really good question. So we raised about 10 million in capital last year. So some really great investors like Multicoin Capital, Floodgate, Signia, NGC, they're incredibly helpful. Boost VC, some really good investors. So we're going to be doing another financing this year, and we'll be doing a public sale so we can get tokens out to validators, to developers, and get them out to the community. And then what we'll do is we have a very conservative operating plan, and SKALE'S is going to act and support the network, and we literally are just going to pay our overhead, and we're just going to support the network. And so and then we win by making the token and the community and the network valuable and bringing utility and value. And so to your prior question about our timeline, we are launching Mount Fuji, which is the first release, Fuji, in July, where all our validator partners will be running the network that we've been running since February with our own servers. And then later in Q4, we're going to launch a live mainnet. And then that will actually have utility. We'll have, at that point, our plan is to have over 30 very high quality dApps using the system and have over 300 nodes running in the network. And so when we go and bring this token to people, they're actually getting and buying into something that exists, not something that may exist in a year.
And something that's usable, something that's literally meant for the whole, and you're also putting the term utility to in its true context. I think that's something that isn't done enough right now in crypto. We hear the discussion of it, but not necessarily enough empirical evidence of a true operational utility. And the requisite for that is a native token in situ, operating as it's designed, released post mainnet, more importantly, or at mainnet. Now you're moving towards all of that this year. By the end of 2019, it's all going to be done. Now, it's somewhere in there. There's a point in which people need to access these tokens in a very fluid way, in a very accessible way that requires exchanges. So tough question for you, Jack, but what is the plan there? We hear IEO, ICO, IDO, we see Dutch auctions. You've got a suite of options, mate, to launch this. What's the plan?
So we are going through an evaluation process right now. We have a fiduciary duty to bring this network to market. Okay, so we've signed up for that. We're excited to do it. There are some really great options out there. And I think what we want to do is pick the option that sets up the community for the best success. And that means we need to make sure our validators are supported with a great way to get liquidity and a great way to be able to access tokens to stake into the network. Developers need to be able to buy these tokens and deploy them. And then anyone else in the community that wants to be a part of the system and buy tokens and delegate them, we need to be able to get them tokens. And we want to do it in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't have some crazy economics and crazy spikes. And so we have plans, our valuation, which these things will be published later. We think everything is dialed in very well for any of those options you talked about earlier. And we are going through Stan and I have, a lot of enterprise software experience doing deals, managing processes like this, and we're running an evaluation.
Right. Well, Stan, I wanted to talk to you about what Jack's alluding to, which is one of the fundamental flaws perhaps, and one of the conundrums we see in crypto, and that is the token economic model itself. Often the tokens we've seen in past projects have just been built literally on bullshit. They haven't been true utilities. They certainly haven't made any sense other than a pseudo security. So how can we trust that the token is a utility token by design, but also has an all imperative sustainable model so that it makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so we have kind of a unique approach on this, just to how do we solve this issue. And our way to explain this is that the best token economy is where a crypto network is a network. It has all kinds of parties. It has users, it has validators, these people, that people. And the end goal is to grow the network and make the network as productive as possible. So the token economics should be optimized in such a way that you are a participant in the network. The more you bring to grow the network to make it more stable, the more you need to get paid. Right. So the optimal economics is where every move to improve the network is actually paid for, and every bad thing is penalized. So that's the perfect model. To give you an example, let's take ETH or Bitcoin, right? Not perfect. In ETH, the miners are paid lots of money, but non-mining nodes are not paid anything. They are totally altruistic. So you're running a node, people are making like zillions of requests to you for transactions, for information, you get zero. So that's something which prevents the growth of the network. So our network has many things to measure first. How do you contribute? And we pioneered this notion of something which we call decentralized SLA, or decentralized quality of service, where you as a network member, as a node, agent, validator, you have constantly metrics measured on you. How do you behave? How do you operate? What you do, what you don't do. And then in order for you to get paid at the end of the month, your metrics have to all pass the standard value. And then then the network is a super complex thing. You can't really build the network from the beginning. You have to have some ability to tweak the network. So these metrics that I'm talking about, we will be able to change them by a vote of this foundation, of the validators and everyone else. So if we see some tendencies, either bad tendencies or good tendencies in the network, the foundation will be able to vote to change the metrics, to tweak the incentives. So I think that's the only way to do it. It's impossible to make things right the first time. It's more of an iterative procedure, and we need a flexible mechanism to change things.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's better to be able to change things. We're trying to make the best first guess, but we're leaving some slack for us to adjust in the future.
Right. Well, thank you for that answer. And obviously, if you'd like to know more, there's a white paper and there's other literature out there. Certainly, Stan and his team have led a lot of reports, a lot of research in this area. But I want to ask you, Jack, as someone who's leading this, with regard to those more generic comments you see and your experience in crypto more generally, you often see problems where the token itself, the token models of projects don't align with the growth of the ecosystem. and you see speculation rife in crypto. So, how are you as a CEO addressing this, not just from the algorithmic and mathematical sense, but how have you made sure that there's trust in the model?
Yes. So I think that is a really good question. For what we did first, I think the right answer, the best way to do this is first you have to do extensive modeling. So we just did it in Excel. You don't want to put it into an actual computer model initially. You want to get your hands around the data points. And we wanted to start from a point of pricing. What should it cost? Let's say the network is at optimum load, optimum size. What should the utility cost? And then so you have to look at what do other utilities cost. Then you have to look at basic things like what are hard costs to support the utility. And then you need to look at other network parameters. And then the real answer is you have to eventually build an agent-based model. So we, in the next 2 weeks, will have a full simulation engine built. We're working with a really phenomenal economist, and we will be publishing her work. And then the foundation gets access to this model. So over time, when the foundation wants to make a decision to change something, we can actually run simulations. So that makes sure we don't paint ourselves into a corner. It's one of the biggest issues with token modeling is that you don't think about all the agents and all the scenarios. And if you don't do that, all of a sudden you end up with a point where your growth can be a penalty to your network because it makes things out of price. And that happened sadly with Ethereum. Even though Ethereum, I think, is still a huge success, but had they had access to this, and we're just fortunate. We were able to learn and again, learn from other people's mistakes and be able to stand on shoulders of giants and access a lot of really smart people to help optimize.
You certainly were very fortunate in that respect because Ethereum really was setting the standard for the smart contract, but not only that, really just trying to evolve themselves and had to do a lot of patchwork as well with Plasma, with Casper, there's so many things going on. But with regard to your own modeling and going back to that token, one of the things we do see is volatility, just as a general, point in the entire crypto domain right now. So in the future, once you have that native token operational, how is it your focus, or is it in the interest of Scale to try and have some sort of stability somehow in the long term?
Yeah, so we have stability built into our price model. So it's something very unique. You could almost think of it as a software as a service price model. So you Scale tokens and you buy a chain for a period of time. So I could buy my chain for 24 months and I put my money in, and then every month it takes at 1/24 and it gives it to the validators. So I'm not worried about per transaction price. And we also have this gas, like almost behind the scenes gas model that's not payment oriented. It's meant to protect the network from DDoS attacks. So our payment model is based on the premise of security. And it's also based off the premise of network load. And so if the network gets overloaded, guess what? It costs more, which makes more validators come and set up more nodes and then it decreases price pressure. And again, this is something that E2O has really done a lot of research that supported our efforts. And our economist has really helped us define that further. But at our core, you can buy a resource for a period of time as opposed for per transaction. And that alone adds tremendous stability to users.
And I think all the things we're talking about here evidence more of the utility and the kind of forethought that you've all put in as a team to make sure that it is a standalone utility at the, even at the SEC from their stance, when they're looking down, they can eventually evaluate this and make it clear that it is a utility. So obviously the whole thing is geared and ready to really emerge and showcase what you can do. But I guess the thing I wanted to ask you now is just the final endpoints. What do you need to do to get to maintain? What are these milestones you need to really hit so that you can ensure you're ready?
Yeah, so Stan and the team have done a phenomenal job building up the developer and dApp side. So the dApps are running, they have most of the features they need. Where we're really focusing now on is just finalizing that validator, CLI or command line interface tooling, resourcing and orchestration. So really it's around the network parameters and how the network is run by validators. And and we're very far along. That's going to be, as I said, in July, we'll be launching the Fuji, Scale Fuji, where validators will be running a network that dApps will be using. And then when we get there, then it's about hardening. So that's when we're testing. We're going to do, I thought Cosmos did a phenomenal job with Game of Stakes. We're going to have something similar. And we really want to test the security of our network though. And as Stan said, we're excited about partnering with Gitcoin to do bug bounties. And then we stabilize. And then our goal then, so we're really close. And
sounds like
our hype, we put hype after, and we still aren't trying to hype anything. We're just going to bring a utility to the world, but we're very far along compared to other tokens in the wild that, still are, I think.
And I've been following along as well, and it's certainly true that you haven't ever really been pushing for the PR and for being in the spotlight, but soon I imagine that's going to emerge, and that's a good segue into the next question, that is the marketing strategy. Having known you for some time, Jack, you're not one to really play into that crypto sort of narrative of trying to hype something and really bolster the narrative. You just want to be, of real, build out the guts of this. The tech is always first and paramount. But at some point, you need to be known, just as Google did and as any of these previous systems. How on earth are you going to do that, from the outset? How do you really Algorand's a great example now, because right now they've just shown that they've just literally come out of nowhere to really shock everyone with the things going on. So is that sort of the approach you're taking? Are you engaging with institutional parties? Are you engaging with parties beyond the crypto sphere to garner their attention, so that when you come out with your PR model, it's really going to showcase what you can do?
Yeah, and I think the core premise around everything we do is authenticity. Mm-hmm. And so what it comes down to, we had to build something of value that's worth telling the world. Now we feel like we have something, and we feel like it's our duty to tell people so that we can make an impact. And so you will see us being very loud and vocal, and thankfully have friends like you that are able to pull us in to interview us and to share our message. And so it is all part of our plan, and we're going to start doing that now. Where we have been doing it very aggressively and in the right manner is in the developer community. Mm-hmm. And we have this model around awareness, education, and enablement. And this works for investor community, developer community, and validator community. So first off, people need to know who we are and what we're doing. But then we really want to make it seamless for them to just be educated on how this works. And if you're a developer, how do I, what's the documentation? How do I deploy? How does the system work? If you're an investor, you need to know very easily, how does the network work? What are the economics? What is the consensus model? What is the staking model? And on the validator side, it's a similar equation. But then at the end, we need to enable people and make them successful. And those success stories drive more awareness. So you'll see us doing a lot of publicity, not just hey, we're great, but literally our developers who are using this talking about it themselves. And that, I think, speaks volumes louder than Stan and I could do on our own.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, it's been an absolute privilege. It really has, to have this first discussion, this long interview, to really find out what the plans are, what you've been doing for Scale. We have the CTO and the CEO in this opportunity, this interview, this moment, to really explain, explicate, and let us know what they're doing, both in the past, in the present, and in the future for Scale. I really look forward to talking to you more, gentlemen, because this is just the start for you. Literally, as you move to Scale, you've built the mechanisms, you've built the tech. Now it's time to really showcase what you can do. I strongly suspect, from what you've been saying, Jack, that it's not very long ahead for you to really start to showcase literally on exchange. I think that's going to happen before we know it. Mainnet, literally Q4. So big things to come. PR will certainly start to emerge by default, because people will talk about you, and you're doing things with innovative approaches with your nodes. As you said, you're using Ethereum in a very unique way, and you're certainly looking, as Stan's mentioning, to scale infinitely with nodes potentially by the sheer design. So gentlemen, I wish you all the very best in this layer 2 solution, and it's going to be exciting to see how you play out this year.
Thanks, Brad. It's been a real pleasure.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. All the best. Take care.